This video covers information found in modules 18 and 19 in your book. We will talk about, well, I guess we've already talked about generalist and specialist species, K-selected and R-selected species, survivorship curves, carrying capacity, and population growth and resource availability. To start, a population refers to the number of individuals of the same species. A community is all of the populations in an area. And in population ecology, we study factors that causes changes in populations. Some characteristics of populations are their size, density, distribution, sex ratio, and age structure. Population size is represented by the letter capital N, and it purely means the number. So how many squirrels live within this area. Population density tells you the number of individuals per unit area. For example, maybe an area has 431 deer per square kilometer. A population distribution tells you how spread out individuals are, and they can be random, uniform, or clumped, which you can see here. So random is just can be anywhere. Some plants, for example, will grow in a uniform dispersion, and some species lived in a clumped, so they have little clusters of individuals there. The sex ratio tells you how many males there are to females. It's usually close to 50-50, but sometimes that number can be off, particularly with smaller population sizes. Age structure diagrams will show you how many individuals are in a particular age group, and we'll look at those in more detail when we talk about the human population and consequences later. Density-dependent and density-independent factors affect a population size. Density-dependent factors are any factors that influences an individual's probability of surviving and reproducing, but it does depend on the size of the population. It's usually going to be based on a limiting resource, which is something that limits the population growth because individuals have to have it to survive and reproduce. An example of a density-dependent factor is food. What we'll get to later is that we do have a maximum number of areas that, maximum number of individuals that an area can support, and we call that carrying capacity, or K. Density-independent factors have the same effect on individuals no matter what the population size is. And some examples of density-independent factors are tornadoes, fires, and volcanic eruptions. We will look at two population growth models that we can use to predict a population size at a given time. The two types are exponential growth, and the second type is logistic growth. With exponential growth, we have that J-shaped curve. This growth occurs without any limiting factors, so it can increase exponentially. We can calculate a future population by multiplying the current population size by e to the RT, where R is the growth rate, so maybe 1.4% or something, and then time in the number of years. Can exponential growth occur forever? Generally, no, because we do have resource limitations. Eventually, you'll hit a point where there just simply aren't enough resources to support a population, which is what we see with logistic growth. Logistic growth has an initial period of exponential growth, and then it slows down as it reaches that carrying capacity where we have the maximum number of individuals that the area can support. Population sizes are limited by things like food, shelter, things like that, and it produces this S-shaped curve. What normally happens with populations experiencing logistic growth is that their population size oscillates around the carrying capacity. So first you'll have some overshoot where the population is too high, and then you'll have a pretty extreme die-off from too much resource consumption, depleting the resources, and then you'll have overshoot and die-off. But that oscillation or variance from the carrying capacity will get smaller, and the population size will stable out around the carrying capacity. Population sizes can also change based on predator-prey interactions, which you can see here from the hare and the lynx. When one increases, the other starts to decrease, and so then that thing decreases, and then the other thing increases, and so it does that same cycle of increasing and decreasing over time. There are two different reproductive strategies that we will talk about, K-selected and R-selected. K-selected species in general will have a lower growth rate, and so their population size increases slowly until it reaches carrying capacity. R-selected species, on the other hand, have a high growth rate that often leads to overshoots and die-offs. Some traits of R and K selected species. K selected species will have a long lifespan, a long time until they reach reproductive maturity. They have few reproductive events and therefore have few offspring. Offspring are generally large. There is parental care, slow population growth rate. Their regulation is based on density dependent factors, and they'll be stable near the carrying capacity. Our selected species have a short lifespan, short time to reproductive maturity, many reproductive events, many offspring, small offspring. They do not have parental care. They'll have a fast growth rate, and their regulation is based on density independent factors, and their dynamics are highly variable. So things like humans and elephants are examples of K-selected species, but then things like mice will be R-selected species. With that, we can produce survivorship curves, which tells you something about the life cycle of that species. Type 1, which you can see at the very top, has high survival for most of the lifespan, and then they die off in large numbers as time goes on. So we're thinking about our larger mammals here. They live for a long time, but then once they reach a certain age, there's a big die-off in the population. Type 2 has a constant decline in survivorship over time, should be things like corals. And then type 3 survivorship has low early survival where few reach adulthood, but the ones that do can be around for a bit. Things like mosquitoes are examples of type 3 survivorship organisms. The last thing for this is to think about metapopulations, which are groups of spatially distinct populations that are connected when individuals move from one place to another. There will be some sort of corridor that connects the populations. And the issue here is that these small populations can experience inbreeding depression because they're mating with genetically similar organisms. And that is all for modules 18 and 19.